So, welcome everybody, and welcome to City Lights Live, I should say, the online component of the City Lights events calendar. I am your host, Peter Maravellis. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush peoples. Always an honor and a privilege to be able to do so. Tonight, we are delighted to have with us Jon Hickey. We are celebrating the publication of his debut novel, Big Chief, published by our friends over at Simon & Schuster. It has been named a most anticipated book of 2025 by the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, the LA Times, and LitHub. And for good reason. It is an absolutely stunning novel. It's at once very fast-paced, it's really emotionally thrilling, and while at the same time exploring issues involving identity, the collision of the social with the political spheres in our lives, and the struggle for belonging that's at stake in our search for personal agency and a sense of community. So Jon Hickey is an enrolled member of the Luc du Flambeau Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa Nation. He is a Stegner Fellow whose short fiction has appeared in the Massachusetts Review, Gulf Coast Online, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Meridian, amongst others. He makes his home in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and two sons. And we're going to be joined tonight in conversation by Tomas Moniz. Tomas is the editor of the award-winning Rad Dad zine, which produced two literary anthologies, Rad Dad and Rad Families, a celebration. He is also the recipient of the San Francisco Literary Arts Foundation's Mary Tannenbaum Award. So really an honor to have them both with us here tonight. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Jon Hickey and Tomas Moniz. It is a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to City Lights.
It sure is great to be here. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to be a part of this. Jon, I'm really excited to talk with you.
And I'm excited to talk to you, Tomas. It's good to see you. Good to see you.
I know.
Yeah.
We run into each other, loosely or quickly, like in the real world. So it's actually, this is like a nice, good, slow, like conversation we can have uninterrupted.
Yeah.
I'm happy about it.
I'm stuck with you.
You are.
There's no escape. There's no escape. So should I start with a reading?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. I want to read from the very beginning of the book, something that kind of gives a nice introduction to the characters. And I always feel like I should just define who we're talking about. My narrator is Mitch Caddo, and he's kind of the fixer for the tribal president of the Passage Rouge reservation.
There's a lot of things, isn't he?
Yeah, right, exactly. He does a lot of things. And the tribal president is Mack. That's who I'm referring to here. So it begins. On the morning of Thanksgiving, or rather feast day, because Mack decided Passage Rouge would not honor the colonialist origins of the holiday, the people of our mid-sized reservation line up along Peace Pipe Road, the main drag in town. They're in good spirits because we're handing out the annual per capita checks, 2 Gs, double the usual amount, thanks to our last-minute raid on the general fund. Credit cards and overdue rents are about to be paid off. Used cars and Christmas gifts are about to be bought. And on top of this, the first 50 tribal citizens in line get a free meal and a $20 voucher for a couple of spins inside. Are we buying votes or are we delivering on promises? Well, it depends on whose camp you're in. I watch our constituents from the window of the Migazi suite on the top floor of the 4-story hotel, and Max sees them too, a wary, contemptuous look clouding the usually ursine friendliness of his face. He's going down there to dole out meals, hand out per capita checks, and remind them that in a week they're going to vote, and they better make the right choice, although it's possible, even probable, that these same people will vote for Gloria Hawkins, which has the president feeling morose this morning. He hasn't said a word to me since I've come up to the suite, so I startle when he croaks, "Where the hell's Bobby Lone Eagle?" He's referring to our chief of police, who's fetching the president's ride, the big chief, from the car wash in town. He's on his way. Wasn't going to make you walk your ass over there. I just want to be waiting on him at the valet stand with my hands in my pockets. Wouldn't be a good look, right, cuz? We're not really cousins in the literal sense. We're not related. Cuz is a name to keep me close, to make me feel like we're bound together by something other than our jobs, our office, our ambitions. We are family in our deeds, our conspiracy. And maybe it's his way of reminding me that if we're going down, we're going together. I grunt in the affirmative and gently prod him over toward the door to get him moving. On our way out, he stops to check himself in the full-length mirror at the door, smooth down the whiskers, tug the front of his ribbon shirt to get it to drape just right. We get into the elevator, his breath whistling through the hairs in his nose. He's white-knuckling a hangover, but when the elevator doors open to the Golden Eagle's gaming floor, he has willed himself sober, wearing a dreamy half smile. There's a word for him, and that word is massive. He is a solid mass. Growing up, he was tall and skinny, but now he is tall and massive. Not fat, not muscular, just massive. Covering this mass like a tarp is a satin shirt trimmed with blue and red ribbon, embroidered with flowers and vines. A beadwork Thunderbird medallion as big as a teacup saucer dances a soft two-step along his massive chest as he walks through the casino. A flat-brimmed Washington Nationals hat sits on his head just a little off-center, and underneath, his hair is woven into a tight, long braid that lands in the middle of his massive back. It doesn't matter what they say about him in private. All the sniping, all the whispers. The gold uniform dealers and pit bosses stand at attention when they see him, and he nods at them as they tend to the 24-hour churn of cards and chips. He can relax here. He can be himself. He lives upstairs. His gravitational wake pulls me along with him into the casino. Bobby Lone Eagle, the chief of police, and let's not forget, because I haven't, one of my childhood tormentors, intercepts us at the mouth of the double row of blackjack tables in the grand atrium. Mac gives him a fist bump and Bobby falls in with us, and we set out for the golden doors that lead to the valet stand. That's where our former tribal president and current shadow advisor, Buzz Carlisle, waits for us, making a big show of tapping the face of his Rolex to remind us that Indian time ain't going to cut it today. Our people are waiting in the cold for their checks. We see him, but that doesn't make Mac walk any faster. We may have been good sports and kept him on as a consultant to preserve institutional knowledge, all that. No sense throwing out the pilot after hijacking the plane, right? But he sure as hell acts like he's still the boss. I guess after you've been tribal president for 2 decades, it's hard to let go of that power. Get your asses in gear, he's saying. He needs to teach us kids a few things, like the importance of punctuality. But we're fast learners, aren't we? For instance, we learned in the last go-around that if you want to be chief and your name isn't Arno or Coda, you put on your piously traditional Indian persona, get your ass in front of the electorate, and speak with a serious and measured tone about the need to go back to the old traditional ways, to rediscover the language of our ancestors, to build our nation, to provide for the next 7 generations of ancestors to come. You shake some hands and learn some names and make it rain for the right people at the right time. This work doesn't happen on the gaming floor. Sir, on this feast day morning, there's no drought of gamblers leashed to their 9-line machines with their loyalty cards tracking their compulsions, inhaling Newports and exhaling gossip between slot spins. These are not our voters. The people most likely to actually vote await us outside the doors of the William R. Paulson Tribal Government Center, cold and hungry for their checks and free meals, which will be handed to them by their tribal president. I may run the operation, but I'm meant to be invisible, to blend in. Mac, however, must dominate the room, and watching him never fails to fill my ears with that pleasing electrical hum, the low-frequency rumble of power. Our grip on that power is shaky now, but we aren't quite dead yet. Furtive glances shoot through our bones like gamma radiation as we parade across the gaming floor. He smiles at people who recognize him, his head tucked down in rehearsed humility. He is a head taller than anyone else, which is probably not true, but feels true. Hands come out of nowhere, reach up and slap him on the shoulder. He turns his head slightly to acknowledge them. We walk down the double row of blackjack tables underneath the ornate dome, its rim decorated with the silhouettes of our Anishinaabe ancestors and Shamokamonog traders meeting together in brotherhood to sign the Treaty of La Pointe. And when one of those silhouettes moves, I realize I'm looking at a janitor with a vacuum cleaner strapped to his back. I know him. We paid for his mother's wheelchair rent because we look out for our people. With his free hand, the janitor waves at the president, but I'm the only one who catches it. And the sight of that silhouette cleaning up after the other silhouettes chills me like a blast of air conditioning. And I lag after the entourage until the president turns around and notices I'm a few paces behind him. I can see him talking at me, but I don't quite hear it over the electric dissonance of 250 video slot machines chiming at once. So he repeats himself. You okay, cuz? You got that look on your face. Don't worry about my face, I say, more testily than I mean to. He pauses for a moment, takes too long to think of something smart to say, but he's got nothing. He keeps moving down the aisle. And I'll stop there.
Nice job. Nice one. I love that scene. Yeah. You know, actually, what this leads into one of the first questions I kind of came up with was exactly about Mitch, because I was just thinking about trying to write a character like him that's so conflicted. Like there's times like you really feel for him, and you know, I'm not giving away too much through the book, but you know, the arc of his journey and what he's, you know, discovering about himself. But there's also times he's like such an asshole, right? He's just like he's making decisions that you just like know are problematic and just wrong, right? And so I just even in my own writing, when I think about trying to write like a, you know, a complicated, difficult character, I find it really difficult. I was wondering what was it like to sit with this character, right? Who yeah, is just kind of problematic in many ways. So yeah, unpack that for me.
Well, it wasn't easy. You know, and I'm aware of it. I think in a way, I was thinking of presenting a character in crisis,
Right.
and a character who has maybe no moral center. I wouldn't say no moral center. I'd say
yeah, he's got one, but it's
yeah.
like he's fine. He's trying to figure it out, right?
He's closed himself off to it in exchange for power.
Right.
And that, you know, it's more convenient for him to ignore it, and that's what he does. That's where we find him in the very beginning. And I mean, the book is about him finding the way back from that, but it starts the way where it starts. It is very difficult, I think, you know, and it was difficult for me. And part of my task writing it was to, you know, to find the justifications, and not just the justifications, but the way out of it. You know, he starts cynical. He starts lost.
Right.
And you know, the truth of that is that, you know, if you're depicting a character like that, that's a character that's kind of hard to like. I think in general. And
well, the hard part was because for me, it's like you can see that you could like him, right? But then he would do these things that you're like, dude, what are you doing, right? Like,
stop it.
Like I know you, yeah, I know you see that this is wrong, and you doing it anyways. What's up?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, in furthering again, like this, you know, the great struggle within Mitch is the struggle for power versus, you know, this, you know, huge lack that he has, moral, spiritual, and again, you know, he's gotten to this point because he's been able to ignore it. But as we find out, you know, that it's still there, you know, it's like he hasn't cut it out of himself. So it's manifesting itself in a very physical way, especially, you know, from the first few pages. So I don't know, like I think that the book is really inspired by a lot of my own sense of disconnection with, let's say, Lac du Flambeau, the home of my ancestors. And you know, you run through the gamut of, you know, when you really examine that disconnection, and you know, what can you do to keep that connection alive? What aren't you doing? It sometimes feels like it's hard to have a charitable view of that, you know, that you tend to be judgmental, you know. And I felt that writing Mitch, you know, especially in the beginning. And yeah, no, he does these things, and you're like, you know, I was this close to, like, you know, maybe identifying with you, you know, and that was just the story of the writing of it, you know, it was like discovering these things about him.
Right. Yeah. No, I actually really appreciated that. And I appreciate you also bringing it back to your own kind of like relationship to your own sense of self, because it's the same thing with me. Like, you know, for those of us who, you know, come from a particular place and then you leave it for whatever reason, and then trying to find your way back. And sometimes, like, you know, especially like for him, like going to school, like clearly, you know, he left his like relatively, you know, rural community, gets this fancy education. Of course, that's used both against him, but it's also a form of power within his own community. And yet there's like resentment and there's all that kind of stuff mixed into it. And so yeah, I just really kind of appreciate it. I've seen, you know, it's analogous to so many both works of fiction I love and also people I know who have kind of dealt with this a little bit. Like, how do we come back to our senses of who we are, our identities, right? All that real powerful stuff for our sense of, you know, living in this world. But yeah, so thank you for that.
It's a very fraught place to be, and I think that, you know, there are a lot of pieces of art, you know, or books that deal with it.
Oh yeah.
And art that I admire and you know, take to heart. But I think that, you know, like I really wanted to get into the, you know, the dirt of it, you know, because like it's very fraught, you know, and it is like Mitch is resentful, as you point out. Like he thinks that, you know, that this connection is actually being taken from him.
Right.
Like, you know, he's in that spot where it's like, you know, like it's that deep, you know, that and it comes out as that resentment. And I think that that's also another point where it's like, yeah, hard to empathize at certain times, I think.
Right. Well, you know, also this leads into like another kind of key theme I thought about the book, which is, you know, like how we deal with grief, right? I mean, there's so much that, you know, like as we read and discover, like that he hasn't dealt with, right? He hasn't faced or been honest with himself, from his like mother to all these kind of things, you know, Joe, the father figure, you know, which in the stuff that happens in the book and there, and his relationship with, is it Layla?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's all this grief that's there, right? Like so much of it. And one of, you know, my own book that, you know, just came out is a lot about like how we, you know, how we need others to help us heal through grief. And yet we never put grief behind us. It's kind of always with us. And I kind of felt like it was really similar what you were doing with this notion of grief and the various, you know, things that result from not taking care of that. I'm wondering if maybe that was a theme that you had thought of specifically, or did you, it came up in the writing of this story? Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
I think it was always present, that sense, you know, just kind of going back to what I was saying a second ago, that you know, it's what's the word, sublimation, or, you know, he's put it, he's buried it, he's pushed it down, and, you know, because it is advantageous for him to do that in order to keep his power. But yeah, it's always there. It's always, you know, doing exercise, you know, doing pull-ups, and, you know, waiting for you outside afterwards. And I mean, that was just one of the themes. I mean, it's a debut novel, so I felt like
yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say I was putting everything into it.
Right, definitely.
You know, like there's a lot of them going on.
The play with ceremony was there, right? There was like traditional ceremony that was there, but there was all these like subtle, you know, ways that we, you know, acknowledge and either avoid or deal with. And it just was like multiple layers there that I saw in the book that was kind of happening. And so, yeah, I kind of appreciated that meditation on, you know, God, what are we going to do to be honest with ourselves about how we're feeling, right? How do we like, create families when our families are broken and you know, kind of pieced together? And, you know, it was an intense kind of family history he's sharing and kind of unpacking. You know?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'm glad you're picking up on that stuff. I mean, I just imagine like there was a lot going on, and you know, a lot of conflict, a lot of, you know, interior conflicts, you know, amongst the characters, and you know, spills out into exterior conflict.
Exactly.
And, you know, just again, just very aware of a few of the themes that were coming through, and at times it felt a little the swaying tower, like it all sort of collapse at any point, you know. And Just making the composition sound like as action-packed, sort of
Right, right,
more
right,
action-packed, and then just me sitting in my office, and
right.
but yeah.
Well, actually, maybe this is like we could step back a little bit out of the book. I love to hear about like the trajectory of a book, right? Like, did you immediately kind of know what you were doing when you started? Were there moments where you were like, I'm stuck, I can't finish this? Like, tell me what it was like to birth this book a little bit. Like, yeah.
It certainly did not come out fully formed.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, I've been writing around the subject.
Right.
Tribal politics is just very fascinating to me. It's just the big implications on a small or seemingly small scale. The electorates are very, very small. It resembles
It
like
was like
like a small,
1,200 votes or something. How many people were voting? It was,
yeah, like a
yeah.
very small amount. But that controls a lot. It
Oh,
controls
much
millions
money.
of millions of dollars going through the economy of the reservation. Um, and it's the stewardship of like a culture and a
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
so like, and then just your basic everyday housing and services and all that stuff, and it's all decided by just a very small amount
It's crazy to
of
think about,
votes.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the conflicts that are inherent in those elections are so deep seated, and they go back so long. um, so I always felt like that was going to be, just a very rich, dramatic backdrop for a story whenever I found one, and it took me a long time to find one.
And was the story that you found the kind of Mac Mitch relationship, or was like Mac the kind of like initial like image you were writing to? Like, I mean, how'd you find that voice for Mitch?
The voice came from inspirations, I have a lot of affinity books.
Hmm.
One of them was Invisible Man.
Oh,
That's been my touchstone book for years upon years.
okay.
um I've always loved that voice,
Right.
but I think when it really came into focus was, I got really into All the King's Men by
Okay. Yeah.
Robert Penn Warren, which is a classic book, and I find that, it's not as read as it once was,
Mhm.
and if you read it, it's a very uh, prescient book.
Mhm.
It's about a populist. It's
Right.
about an autocrat,
Right.
um, and the corruption of power, and that sort of thing. But what I love about that book and about Invisible Man is that they're very voice driven, from the very first pages, that narrator just grabs you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I remember that when I started writing this, I was like, that was kind of the gold standard, because I think that, like when we're talking about politics, it's a tricky thing, like,
Right.
the book is ostensibly about politics. It
Right.
starts as about politics. It moves on, but I think that there's a lot of things that you have to be careful about, when you're writing something along those lines. And one of them is didacticism. You don't want to be didactic.
Right.
You don't want to just have this sort of pat story,
Right.
about. But also, when you get into the nitty gritty, it tends to get a little dry.
Yes.
And I've been on the receiving end of some of those stories, so I was like,
Right.
I
Right.
don't know, this is kind of into the weeds a little bit.
Right.
So I figured, like, okay, we need a voice. We need
Mhm.
like somebody that's just something with a lot of kinetic energy.
Right. Yeah.
um so I mean, once I found that, things started to fall into place a little bit. I started writing in it about 2016.
Okay.
And I always joke, what happened in 2016? Something. Um, but I mean, that's not the only thing that was, happening around the time. So there was, of course, that election, but also my son was born,
I was going to ask
2016.
you about that as well, because I mean,
Yeah,
obviously the relationship with like our contemporary political situation is just, I mean, it's just there, right? You can't avoid
yeah.
seeing what's happening now through kind of the lens of also the story that you're writing. But And I'm sure that's a really important one. But like one of the things I often find, particularly for male writers, is that so often, you know, when we become parents, like you know, I'm always curious about how this impacts, you know, both the themes that we write about and,
Yeah.
you know, as well as the act of being able to write. Like I think so often that's never given space to kind of unpack a little bit. And I'm wondering what that was like to become, you know, to start writing your first book as you're beginning the journey of in the very emotional journey and at times very physically taxing journey of parenting. Like how'd you balance all that stuff?
Well, it slowed everything down a little bit. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I love my, it was the one son for a while, and now I have two.
Right?
And they're great guys, and I just love them so much. The truth though is that taking care. I was the stay-at-home dad for
Right.
those years, you know, and it really does take a lot out of you, and
Oh yeah.
your vocabulary sort of reduces down to how old your son is, you know, or how old your child is. So that made things a little bit hard to switch from, you know, talking to a 6 month old to, you know,
Oh,
trying to
geez.
write a book for adults.
Right.
The thing that, you know, that I found profound, you know, at the time was that my son was born, and due to the whole system of blood quantum, which is absurd, it's an absurd system.
Right.
But according to that, my son had enough blood quantum to be a citizen of our tribe, and he is now. Uh, but it occurred to me that he will not have the same connection that I have because, you know, we live here in San Francisco.
Right.
And when I was growing up, I grew up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. It was just a drive away, so we would go very often. And
Right.
you know, we had family there. We had a lot of family there, and just over time, you know, people die, people move away,
Mhm.
and just the basic fact of that, you know, we're not going there once a month.
Right.
And it occurred to me, and it was a scary moment because what I realized was that it was the end result of termination policy. You
Mhm.
know, that this was how it was supposed to go. You know,
Right.
that you know, disperse us as a tribe, and you know, we lose that connection. And I began to sort of panic about that and be like, you know, what am I going to do to help him have that meaningful connection
Yeah.
that I have? And I have not figured that out. But I mean, you know, I mean, so that was going on in my mind as I started this thing too. So I mean, I think that it's reflected in the book. You know, it's
Yeah, it
father
is
figures
100.
and, you know, family lines and all that sort of thing.
Right. Right.
But yeah, those were the things that were going on, and I think that those necessary things were, you know, the circus, the political circus of 2016 that continues today in this very absurd political time that we live in, mixed with like you know, being a father,
Right.
and trying to maintain that connection with this place that means so much to me and my ancestors. So those two things were essential in coming up with an actual story.
Yeah, I mean, it's really you brought up. I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking how intense that must be, right? To kind of worry about the responsibility to help your child, you know. Well, they got to find their own connection, but also like kind of allow opportunities for that, right? And what's
Yeah.
it? Yeah, well, you know, God, that is really. I can see how profoundly terrifying that might be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mix because, you know, you want him to have that connection. And then also like, I remember being a kid on the reservations, you know, like, you know, visiting, and uh, I don't know, you
Yeah.
know, it could get a little dangerous. There were fireworks and stuff around it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Uh, Lucky
yeah,
I
it's
have hands, you know, like,
yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, my own experience too is like, you know, coming from my father's from New Mexico, my mom is not from New Mexico, and like kind of finding that balance and you know, yeah, it can be really, she laughed. She was like, I'm out, right? And so I
Yeah.
be with her. I was like 3. What can you do? But then, like, how do you kind of like live in both those worlds when ultimately sometimes both those worlds don't really accept you. They've always kind of keep you at arm's distance. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that's and then as you become a parent and you kind of now navigating all of that. But maybe one other thing about the book I'm really curious about, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, was I love, as someone who tries to deal a lot with kind of redefining masculinity and
Mm.
obviously unpacking and owning patriarchy and toxic masculinity. This book is very, very male in that way, right? It's got all these like the fraternity of even in the piece you read, like Buddy, Buzz, Mac, Mitch, right? There's just these hugely male kind of ways they speak together, the way they hang out
Yeah.
together. Even the title, right? Big Chief, feels like the
Yeah.
most
Yeah. Yeah.
masculine character in the book, right?
Right.
And I was just wondering, like, but it's also got really these really tender moments of like these elders who are there and who lead the way. And then I'm forgetting, is it Reed, the character who's the son of the elder? Yeah, and so
Yeah. Read. Yeah.
there's this way in which there's variations on masculine kind of energy that you capture in the book, and of course Mitch himself, right, is this kind of navigating the kind of world of power and the world of home. And we haven't talked much about Layla yet. I have a question about her and their relationship, but yeah, just I'm wondering if that was something you were aware of, the kind of way masculinity was being kind of explored in your writing.
I think, yeah, I was very aware of it, and kind of back to the earlier point too about I just wanted to be careful about being didactic about it, and allow characters to be who they were,
Right.
because you're right. It starts out very broy. It starts out, in this. I mean, Mitch and Mac's relationship is very rooted in that toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
and it makes it just impossible in many ways to form, maybe deeper connections with each
Right.
other, or
Yeah.
to forgive each other, or to like eventually it becomes a thing. And
That's actually really nice that you bring up that there. Yeah, that the if you look at the evolution of their relationship, where it ends up with like there is a tragedy to it in a way, right?
yeah, yeah, because I mean, I was, and I'm sure you, I mean, I don't know how it is for younger folks, than you or me. Not calling you old, Tomas.
Oh, I am.
I was
I'm
just
almost
starting
I
it. I
want to
was
be an
like, oh
elder
no,
soon, right?
you got the gray thing going on. You are a wise elder.
Yes, I am.
Um, but we were brought up in this toxic soup of masculinity, and I know that it's been a journey for me to,
Right.
like even on, like, I was thinking about this. Um, the way that I came up as sort of a writer,
Mhm.
the books that you're reading, that are kind of foisted upon you. I realized, several years ago, just how heavily male they were,
Right.
um, and how so it made it more of a thing. Like, gotta, like, mix
Yeah.
it up, and
Yeah.
and sort of like lose this sort of, because it is toxic. It paints you in the corner, and it cuts you off from, like, all this wisdom.
Hmm.
um and I think I was aware that, as soon as I started, writing Mitch and Mac together, that, here are two guys that have a very dysfunctional friendship, and um because the rules of that masculinity make it impossible for them to connect.
Connect or be vulnerable or
Exactly. Yeah. And that it makes them dismissive of the female characters, in the beginning. I mean, it is a match between, Mitch and Gloria Hawkins, who sort of exemplifies the other side there. Um, but again, like, I didn't want that to be like, it's just a didactic
Right.
point of, like,
That'd be
men are
awful.
crap, and women, no, I mean, to some extent, I do believe some of that. But I wanted it to breathe in the story as, like, um,
we're not just like on those gender lines. We're not just on, political lines. We're human beings. Everybody's a human. Everybody's got their blind spots. Everybody's got their, just the way that they've been operating for the last several years, and that's coloring everything they're doing. And it just so happens that it's set up like this. So I mean, I didn't start to write a book about that toxic masculinity, or but it definitely became a big part of it, and you got to welcome it. I mean, you just like as part of the discussion. I mean, and I think that I'm glad it got in.
Well, as you were speaking, it was reminding me, like, that's why, like, we're writing, like, kind of trying to capture the way the world is working, and of course we want to write in ways that imagine new ways the world can work, but you've got to then, that it brings it back to that, like, how to write difficult characters, because of course I want to write male characters that always do the right thing, right, and all act in ways that are more fully human for themselves. But that's not a lot of the, that's not the way I was, when I grew up. I didn't see much of that. I see, thankfully, so much more about that now, right, with people parenting and kind of really trying to kind of move beyond those like limitations of the particularly toxic masculinity. But the reality is it's there, and these characters have to embody some of that stuff. And so thank you for that honest answer. And it really kind of allowed, I think, me to see the ways in which they were trapped, and they couldn't even see it themselves, which was that was in some ways the tragedy for me of the book, in many ways.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about like some serious stuff. I thought maybe we could, I know we're getting kind of close, but is there a favorite moment that I always like to ask this? Is there like a sentence or like a moment, a scene in the book that you love? Like whenever you like come across it, you're like, that, I love this. This makes me happy. Was there a moment of that in the book?
I think there are a few scenes where I joke about this because it's like there are these scenes that I took months to write, things that and I love them, and they've been worked over so much, because I don't know, and then there are these scenes that only took a I don't know, not a minute, but
an afternoon at a cafe, and they're done.
And those are the scenes that people are like, "Oh yeah, it was really moving," and I'm like, "Oh, why I was moving is because I took, I just wrote it, and
right."
The piece that I read is one of my favorites, just as like as a set piece.
Right, it works.
Welcome to the characters. This is how they see themselves, and this is how the world sees them. That's definitely one of them. There's a piece between Mitch and his mentor Joe, who's the white lawyer who does a lot of work for the tribe, and he's kind of the father figure to Mitch, and talking about the lakes, talking about being on the lakes, like that took a long time, and that was also another one of my favorite sort of my lyrical moments, I think.
I loved, I don't know, I want you to end on a final one before we move to Q&A, but I just wanted to say, like, and it was such a strange moment. It's the story of the one dude that meets him at the bar. He tells about the deer.
Oh yeah, the deer story.
I was just like, what is happening? Like, it was, and it's a long moment, right? Like, I just like, to me, that was a moment when I think about the whole pleasure of reading a book. That was one of my areas. I just really kind of was like, whoa, it sat with me. Like, that one stayed with me.
It's meant to be an interlude. It's meant to be an interlude. It's meant to be a little bit of a callback to, say, All the King's Men. There's a story in the middle of that. I mean, it does not approach the same thing. It's just a nod, and Franken's story, I call it, because it's just sort of an amalgamation of like all those sort of that one was fun. Mitch and Layla is sort of the love interest and sort of the foil to Mitch, and she was so much fun. Whenever she showed up, I was like, all right, Layla's doing stuff. All right, let's see what she's got. Yeah. I do too. So does Mitch.
Right. Yes.
but whenever she showed up, that was the thing. But like, Mac was one of those characters, as you write, like you spend more time with him and he just demands more attention. That's his personality. He's just all eyes on me. I'm the big guy here. Whenever you have a character like him or Layla, they just bring a lot of life to the scene. So
yeah, I would acknowledge those two characters. Layla, especially. Sadly, I had a couple questions about her and their relationship, but I know we've got a minute left. So, any final kind of like thoughts or things that you discovered about yourself or the book and from tour? I always like to end with this kind of, you've brought this book out into the world. You engaged with the community of readers. One final thought of maybe coming back home from that experience?
Well, we were discussing that just before we hit play on the recorder there.
Right.
I didn't realize how exhausted I would be, and I say things like that, and people are like, "You did like 9-10 different dates," and they're like, "Of course you're exhausted." And what was been a really nice surprise is that one thing that I was nervous about was, you write a book like this about tribal councils, and I didn't want people to come away with the wrong takeaway, which is that these are all corrupt, horrible institutions, and that the reservations can't govern themselves. I wanted to show that this was a system that was imposed upon these reservations, and a lot of the bad stuff coming from it is just sort of this natural outcome of forcing a culture, a language into this system of government, while also the termination policy is the backdrop. What I was worried about was people coming to the readings with opinions.
Talk about that,
yeah, about it. But I have been pleasantly surprised, because I talk to people that have worked with their tribal governments, and they tell me that they start with that, and they're like, it's closer than you think it is, because like I was never in I was never on council. I know people that were, I know people that have been working with those governments, but I've been getting the head nod from people that are in the know, and that's been gratifying. Yes.
Jon, thank you so much for talking with me and letting me read this book and choosing me to be your convo partner here. I really, really appreciate it.
I'm so glad you were able to do it. This is fantastic, and we finally got to have a sit down.
I know. There we go. We'll try and do it at the Bay Area Book Festival in a couple of weeks as well. We'll sit outside in the park and talk
without people watching, just you and me.
If anyone wants to come join. We'll hang out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely open to that. But this was great. Yeah.
So we've got some questions coming through. I think you may have already answered the first one. Arturo asked, did you receive any blowback from the tribal community for the candidness of your book? And I guess you kind of answered that. Let's see. Susan asks, what do you want your readers to take away from the experience of reading your book?
I think that the book became a spiritual sort of journey for the characters and for myself in a lot of ways. And I think that the takeaway, that being the takeaway of this is not just a book about politics and how power corrupts. Like that's our starting point. Like, we move into this sort of thing where I have a character who has to learn how to listen, to his people, or to his, whatever family he's got. And I hope that to readers, and I feel like that it is coming through. That's the main thing.
Cool. Don't see any other questions, but actually I have a question about working with your editor, because I always like bringing up editors because they're kind of unsung heroes, and kind of maybe a little bit about that process and what it was like for you.
My editor is Tim O'Connell over at Simon & Schuster, and from the get-go he was just super enthusiastic about it. There were expletives in the email, good ones. about wanting to work with it, but from the get-go, he believed in the book. So his he's such a good reader, and I think that's what it was that he'd read the drafts, he would see what I was trying to get out of it. I think there were questions in the beginning of like what direction the book wanted to go in. Did it want to be like sort of a thrillery sort of thing? Did it want, did it? I think it kind of abuts genre in a way. I mean, I always imagine it as sort of this literary fiction, however we define that. But that it had some elements that were plotty, I guess, and I think that working with him, it felt like he was very protective of what I wanted to get out of it. And then yeah, and he's such a great eye for detail. But also Tim is a thing for water. like whenever I would be writing about the lakes, I find out about him, like one of the things he likes to do, he's a triathlete, and he likes to go swimming in the cold water of the Atlantic or something like that. And like every time water would show up in my book, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, more of this.
Yeah.
And we're like, "Okay, all right, I'll give it to you, Tim." But yeah, no, he's just been such a champion of the book that I always felt like what I wanted to get out of the book was always at the forefront of his comments and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we're huge fans of his. I used to host this thing after BEA. Actually, it was the morning after BEA ended. We called it Recovery Brunch, and we would bring together like 5 or 6 booksellers with 5 or 6 younger editors. And we did this many, many years ago. And he was one of the people I was just like, you got to keep your eye on this guy, because it was obvious that he was definitely going places. And of course, the fact that he's edited this book, is really fantastic.
Yeah, and he's a lot of the other books that he's written or not written. He's worked on by Janine Capocruset. I have it back here. Say Hello to My Little Friend, which just won an award at the LA Times Book Festival. Sylvia Park, her novel as well, that just came out maybe about a month before. The quality of works that he's on is just incredible. I was so lucky to be a part of that. And he's got this, I'm just going to go on. I'm sorry. No, he's got this like a font of knowledge, just the very old school sort of way, but also, within the contemporary world, which is what I was looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a good match.
Yeah.
As we're approaching the top of the hour, I really want to take this moment to thank you both for gracing our virtual halls. And Jon Hickey, congratulations. This is really a fantastic debut and just a fantastic book, and it really speaks on so many different levels. Tomas Moniz, ever grateful to you for doing the honors. You are such a wonderful interlocutor, and you do such a great job. And we hope to host you someday too. I've posted links, everybody, in the chat. You may buy books by both of our authors tonight. Also, if you're in the hood, better yet, come on down, pay us a visit. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach District. We're open 7 days a week. Our hours are 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day of the year. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, fostering an active engagement with books and literary culture through our public events, our publishing program, and our educational outreach. And it is all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So take care, everyone. So long. Be kind to each other. We hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you very much. Take care, y'all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.